All right, welcome to the deep dive, everybody. Today we're going to be tackling,
We're going deep on this one.
yeah, diving deep into MDR and MSSP.
I think these are some of the most
I mean, cybersecurity, it's like
confusing alphabet soup.
awash in acronyms, and
It really is.
I think these two are
Yeah.
really
Up there.
up there,
When
yeah.
it comes to just what do they even mean?
Right. So if you're listening, you're like, wait, MDR, MSSP, what do those even stand for? What are they?
Right.
Let alone how are they different?
Yeah.
We're going to break it all down for you.
This is the place to be.
So yeah, broadly, both of these are about outsourcing some aspect of your security, right? Getting help from the outside to protect yourself from all the bad stuff out there.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, they're both bringing in some expertise that you maybe don't have in-house
Right, exactly.
to handle a pretty complicated
Yeah,
and constantly changing landscape.
right, absolutely. So that's the common thread, but
Yeah.
then, how do they actually deliver that protection?
Right.
What are their, kind of priorities and focus? And that's where things,
Yeah, where it gets interesting.
get interesting.
It's not a one-size-fits-all situation.
No, not at all. So that's what we're going to unpack today.
We're going to unpack it all.
So we want to make sure that by the end of this episode,
Deep dive, sorry.
deep dive, by the end of this deep dive, you know what they are, the key differences,
How they stack up against each other.
how they stack up, who are the, kind of main
The
players.
movers and shakers.
Yeah, exactly. What are the key technologies that they're using? And then where is this whole space even heading?
Yeah, what's the future hold?
Yeah. So whether you're, just starting to think about getting some security help or you're more on the technical side, we want to give you the information to figure out which solution is the right fit.
Absolutely.
So, okay, let's jump right in. What are MDR and MSSP like at their core?
I think it's best to start with just the straight definitions.
Yeah.
So MDR stands for Managed Detection and Response. And this is really a service that's focused on threat detection, investigation, and response. So
Okay.
it's very much about the proactive side of security.
Okay.
So they're monitoring your endpoints, your network, your cloud environments to identify any potential threats.
So really anything that's connected is
Anything and everything.
what they're looking at.
Right. And then the key here is not only just detecting these threats,
Right.
but deeply investigating them,
Right.
understanding exactly what's going on, and then responding to contain and remediate those threats.
So they're not just watching, they're actually
Exactly.
baking. Yeah.
It's not just passive, it's very active, and that's
Okay.
a key differentiator.
Okay, so they're really like jumping in when something is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this is particularly beneficial, I think, for organizations that maybe don't have a lot of in-house security staff,
Okay.
and they need a fully managed solution. They don't want to necessarily have to be involved in every single incident.
Okay.
The MDR provider is going to take care of all of that.
Got it.
So typical MDR services include things like threat hunting, which we'll talk about a little bit later, incident response, having robust incident response capabilities,
Yeah.
using threat intelligence to stay ahead of emerging threats,
Okay.
and then also proactively identifying and mitigating vulnerabilities. So
Really, the full
package.
package when it
Stated.
comes to. Okay, so MDR is like having, a cyber SWAT team basically on speed dial ready to roll when
Yeah.
something happens.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay. All right. What about MSSP?
So MSSP stands for Managed Security Service Provider, and this is a much broader term.
Okay.
These are companies that offer a range of outsourced security services, including monitoring,
Okay.
management of security tools and devices, and overall security posture management.
Okay.
So it's really about the day-to-day upkeep of your security.
Okay. So it's more about making sure all the guards are at their post and doing their
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it.
rounds. Okay.
And so they're providing that continuous monitoring and management,
Yeah.
but often the responsibility for responding to incidents still falls on the internal team.
Okay.
Which can be challenging for some businesses that maybe don't have the resources to dedicate to that.
Right. Okay.
Typical MSSP services include things like firewall management,
Okay.
vulnerability scanning, security log monitoring, and compliance support.
Okay.
So it's really a broader approach to your overall security operations.
Yeah, I think I'm starting to get the picture here. So if MDR is the SWAT team, what's a good way to picture an MSSP?
I really like the analogy that we found in the research.
Oh, okay.
Imagine an MSSP is the security guard for your building.
Okay.
So they're there
I like that.
to monitor who's coming and going,
Yeah.
manage access, handle some of the basic security hiccups. But if there's a serious breach or an incident, then that's when the MDR team, the SWAT team,
Great.
gets called in.
Okay, that's really helpful, I think, just to kind of,
Visualize it.
yeah, visualize it.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got those definitions down. Now let's really dig into the differences.
Let's get into the nitty-gritty.
Yeah. What sets these two apart?
Yeah.
What are the key differences?
So there are several really important distinctions
Okay.
that are going to help you really tell them apart and decide which one is right for you.
Okay.
The first is core focus, as we've kind of already touched on. MDR is laser focused on proactively finding threats and rapidly responding to them.
Okay.
And they're really typically focused on your endpoints,
Okay.
your network activity, and your cloud environments.
Okay.
So that's where they're spending most of their time and resources, whereas MSSPs have a wider lens.
Okay.
And they're really focused on the overall management and monitoring of your security devices and infrastructure.
Okay, so MDR is actively hunting for the bad guys who might already be inside, while MSSP is making sure the doors are locked and the alarms are working.
I love that. Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Okay.
And this difference in focus really leads to a difference in service model.
Okay.
So MDR typically operates on what's called a turnkey model.
Okay.
So they take on the full responsibility for detecting and responding to threats.
Okay. Turnkey meaning it's pretty much all handled by them.
Yeah, you hand over the keys and they take care of it.
Okay.
Which, again, can be really beneficial for organizations that don't have that expertise in-house.
Right.
In contrast, MSSPs typically operate on more of a shared responsibility model.
Okay.
So they're providing you with the tools, the expertise, the information.
Okay.
But your own team often needs to interpret that information and be more involved in making security decisions.
Okay, so it's more of a collaborative...
Yeah, it's a partnership.
Partnership.
Right.
Okay. I see that distinction now. What happens when there's like an actual security incident? How do they differ in their response?
So this is another key area where we see a big difference. MDR typically offers advanced incident response capabilities.
Okay.
So this means they're going to help you contain the damage,
Okay.
eradicate the threat, recover your systems, and conduct a post-incident analysis.
Okay.
So they're not just telling you there's a fire, they're helping you put out the fire.
Right. They're right there with you.
Right there with you.
Fair.
And a good example of this, one of our sources highlighted Expel,
Okay.
which is a company that is known for having very strong incident response capabilities.
Okay. So that's something to kind of
Keep in mind.
keep in mind. Yeah.
MSSP incident response tends to be more limited or basic.
Okay.
They might alert you to the problem,
Okay.
give you some advice, but the real work of fixing it often falls back to your internal team.
Right. Okay. That's a big difference. What about threat hunting? We hear that's a key part of MDR.
Yeah, threat hunting is another major differentiator.
Oh.
And it involves proactively and repeatedly searching through your networks, your systems, your data
Okay.
to find advanced threats that might have bypassed your security defenses.
Okay.
So it's really going beyond just looking at the alerts that are coming in
Okay.
and actively hunting for those stealthy threats that might be hiding.
Right. So it's like almost like an investigative approach.
It really is.
Where there's being a detective. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Okay.
And so traditional MSSP services don't typically include this proactive threat hunting.
Okay.
They're more focused on reacting to known threats or anomalies that they observe in their monitoring.
Okay. So MDR is the active detective.
Yep.
MSSP is more the security guard on patrol.
It's a great way to put it, yeah.
Okay. How about the technology side? How do the technologies that they use stack up?
So MDR heavily relies on cutting-edge technologies.
Okay.
And you'll often see a big focus on things like XDR platforms, AI, machine learning, predictive analytics.
Yeah.
And all of that is used to enhance their threat detection and response capabilities.
Okay. All the really advanced stuff.
All the cool toys, yeah.
Okay. What about MSFP?
So MSSPs might use a broader range of IT security technologies.
Okay.
But their focus is often not as heavily on these advanced detection tools like XDR and AI.
Okay.
They might use them,
Okay.
but it's not necessarily their primary focus.
Right.
And so they might be more focused on a wider set of IT security tools like firewalls, intrusion detection systems, things like that.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, what about trying to actually prevent attacks
Right.
before they even happen?
So this is another area where we see a difference. MDR often includes more proactive security measures,
Okay.
such as exposure management.
Okay.
And this is where they help you understand your potential weaknesses
Okay.
and then develop strategies to reduce your attack surface.
Okay.
So they're really trying to stop the bleeding before it even starts.
Right. Okay.
Um, MSSP offerings might include some proactive security measures.
Okay.
It's not typically their primary focus.
Right.
So they might offer things like vulnerability assessments,
Okay.
but they're not necessarily going to be as focused on those proactive preventative steps
Right.
as an MDR provider.
Okay. Now, what about the kind of more administrative side of security, like dealing with regulations and things like that?
So this is an area where MSSPs often shine.
Okay.
They can provide significant help with compliance and security audits.
Okay.
And they can help you meet various regulatory requirements.
Okay.
They also typically handle the day-to-day management of your security devices,
Okay.
like firewalls and intrusion detection systems.
Okay.
MDR providers don't typically focus as much on these administrative and device management tasks.
Okay, so MSSP is your go-to if you need help navigating that complex world of, security regulations and keeping your, basic security infrastructure running.
Absolutely. Yeah. They're going to be your partner in that.
Okay, that's really helpful. And I think just to, kind of solidify these differences, we can look at some of the kind of key areas.
Yeah. Sum it all up.
Yeah, so main goal for MDR is threat detection and response. MSSP is security management and monitoring.
Exactly.
You know how they work. MDR is, like we said, turnkey. MSSP is shared responsibility.
Yep.
Incident response, MDR advanced. MSSP more basic.
Yeah.
Threat hunting, key for MDR, less so for MSSP.
Right.
Technology, advanced for MDR, broader for MSSP.
Yep.
And then compliance, less focus for MDR, often a key offering for MSSP.
Makes sense.
Okay, so I think we've got a really solid understanding of what they are and how they're different now. Let's zoom out a little bit.
Yeah, let's get the big picture.
Yeah, what does the wider ecosystem for these solutions look like?
So it's a pretty complex ecosystem,
Okay.
but there are several key players and components that are all working together.
Okay, well, let's break it down. Who are the players?
So at the center, of course, are the customers.
Right, the businesses.
The businesses, the organizations that need help with their security.
Yeah, okay.
And then you have the managed security providers themselves.
Okay.
So these are the MDR and MSSP companies.
Right, the ones we've been talking about.
That are actually delivering these services.
Yeah, right, okay.
Then you have the technology vendors.
Okay.
And these are the companies that are developing the actual security tools and platforms that the MDR and MSSP providers use.
Okay, so these are the tool makers behind the service providers.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so examples here would be companies that make sign systems, EDR software, threat intelligence platforms.
Okay.
And then you have integration partners.
Okay.
And these are companies that help make sure that the MDR and MSSP solutions work smoothly with a customer's existing IT environment.
Okay, so making sure everything plays nicely together.
Exactly. That integration is key.
Right.
And then we have the Security Operations Center, or SOC.
Okay.
And this is the central hub where the security analysts who work for the MDR and MSSP providers monitor, analyze, and respond to security events.
Okay, so the heart of their operations.
Yeah, it's the nerve center.
Okay.
And then you have threat intelligence providers.
Okay.
And these are specialized companies that gather and analyze information about threats.
Okay.
And they provide that threat intelligence to the MDR and MSSP providers.
Okay, so they're helping everyone stay ahead of the curve.
Exactly. They're the ones who are really on the front lines of understanding the threat landscape.
Okay.
And then finally, you have incident response partners.
Okay.
And these are specialist companies that can be brought in to help with particularly complex or serious security incidents.
Okay.
And so they're providing that extra level of expertise and support.
Okay, so it's a whole network of...
It's a whole network.
Different players all working together.
Yeah, and it's constantly evolving.
Right. Okay, well, now let's talk about the actual tools of the trade.
Yeah, the nuts and bolts.
Yeah, what are the key technologies and tools that both MDR and MSSP providers rely on?
So both types of providers use a similar set of core technologies, although their emphasis might be a bit different.
Okay.
So a fundamental tool is SIEM, or Security Information and Event Management.
Right.
And this is used to collect, monitor, and analyze security data from all sorts of sources across an organization's IT environment.
Okay.
So examples of SAM tools would be Splunk,
Okay.
IBM Curator, Microsoft Sentinel.
Okay.
And so this is really the central brain for all things security related.
Okay.
And then you have EDR and XDR.
Okay, endpoint detection and response.
Exactly, and extended detection and response.
Okay.
And these are crucial for monitoring endpoints.
Okay.
But XDR takes it a step further
Okay.
and extends that visibility and response across networks, cloud services, and other areas.
Okay, so it's a more comprehensive.
Much more comprehensive,
Yeah.
yeah. And examples here would be CrowdStrike and Sentinel. And then you have NDR, or network detection and response.
Okay.
And this specifically focuses on monitoring network traffic for any signs of malicious activity.
Okay.
And a good example here is Darktrace.
Okay.
And then to automate incident response,
Huh?
providers use SOR, or security orchestration, automation and response.
Right.
And an example here would be Palo Alto Cortex XSOR.
Okay.
And this helps them to respond to incidents more quickly and efficiently.
Okay, so it's making the response process.
Streamlined, yeah, streamlined.
Okay.
And then you have threat intelligence platforms, or TIPPs.
Okay.
And these are vital for bringing together, analyzing, and sharing threat data.
Okay.
And so they help providers to stay up to date on the latest threats and tactics.
Okay, so staying ahead of the attackers.
Exactly, knowing what they're doing and how they're doing it.
Okay.
A good example here is Anomaly.
Okay.
And then with so much moving to the cloud now,
Right.
cloud security platforms are essential. And examples here would be AWS Guard Duty and Azure Security Center.
Okay.
And then finally, you have vulnerability management tools,
Okay.
such as Tenable and Qualys.
Sure.
And these are used to identify and manage security vulnerabilities.
Okay.
And so they're really helping to proactively find and fix weaknesses before the attackers can exploit them.
Right. Okay, so it sounds like both MDR and MSSP have a pretty impressive arsenal of tools at their disposal.
They've got a lot to work with.
Yeah. Okay, now who are some of the important players and vendors in this space?
So the landscape is quite diverse.
Okay.
There are many different players,
Okay.
but we can generally group them into three categories.
Okay.
So first, you have the top MDR providers.
Okay.
And these are companies that primarily focus on offering MDR services.
Okay.
Some prominent names here include SecureWorks,
Okay.
Red Canary, CyberSapiens, and Sophos.
Okay.
And these are really the specialists.
Okay.
They're the ones who are really leading with that threat detection and response focus.
Right, they're all in on that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then you have MSSPs that are increasingly offering MDR services
Okay.
as part of their broader offerings.
Right, so this is where the lines start to get a little blurry.
Yeah, a little bit blurry.
Okay.
Examples here would be TELUS, Bell Canada, Rogers Communications,
Okay.
Herjavec Group, and Expel.
Okay.
And so these are the traditional MSSPs
Okay.
that are now starting to evolve and include more MDR-like features.
Right, okay.
And then you have endpoint security vendors
Okay.
who are also moving into the MDR space.
Okay.
So companies like CrowdStrike and Sentinel,
Right.
which started by focusing on protecting endpoints,
Okay.
are now offering managed detection and response services.
Okay.
And so they're combining their technology with their expertise
Right.
to provide that MDR service.
Okay, so it seems like there's almost like a merging happening where these different types of vendors are kind of moving into similar areas.
Yeah, it's definitely converging.
Okay, interesting.
It's important to note that some providers offer both distinct MDR and MSSP services.
Okay.
So you can find providers that offer both.
Right, so you can kind of mix and match.
Yeah, choose what's right for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. It definitely sounds like a very dynamic and competitive market.
It's a hot market.
Yeah.
It's growing really rapidly.
Okay, well, speaking of dynamics, what are some of the general trends that are shaping this MDR, MSSP, EDR, XDR world?
So there are a number of significant trends
Okay.
that are really driving how this market is changing and evolving.
Okay.
One of the biggest is market growth.
Okay.
Both the MDR and MSSP markets are experiencing substantial growth.
Oh, okay.
And analysts are projecting that this growth is going to continue in the coming years.
Okay. What's driving that growth?
So several factors are driving this growth. The increasing number of remote workers,
Yeah.
the ongoing cybersecurity skills shortage,
Right.
the increasing sophistication of cyber threats,
Right.
and the growing regulatory landscape.
Yeah. Huh?
And so all of these factors are really pushing organizations to seek outside help with their security.
Right.
And this growth is also leading to increased M&A activity
Okay.
as companies are looking to consolidate and expand their offerings.
Right. So we're seeing more companies joining forces.
Absolutely. Yeah. A good example of this is the recent acquisition of SecureWorks by Sophos.
Okay.
And so that's just one example of the kind of consolidation that we're seeing in the market.
Okay. What about the actual technology side of things?
Yeah, so technological advancements are a huge trend,
Okay.
and we're seeing a lot of innovation in this space.
Okay.
So AI and automation are becoming increasingly prevalent,
Okay.
and we're seeing MSSPs using AI and automation
Okay.
to improve their threat detection and response capabilities.
Okay.
Concepts like detection as code are becoming more common in the MDR world,
Okay.
and this allows for more scalable and efficient threat detection methods.
Okay. So basically just smarter tools.
Yeah, smarter tools. And then XDR integration is becoming central.
Okay.
Um, and so this is providing that unified security view
Right.
across different IT environments.
Okay. So it's like more connected security.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. What else is on the horizon?
So another trend that we're seeing is a shift towards proactive security posture management.
Okay.
So MDR services are going beyond just reacting to threats,
Okay.
and they're increasingly focusing on things like exposure management,
Okay.
reducing the attack surface,
Okay.
and even using user behavior analytics, or UBA,
Okay.
to detect insider threats
Okay.
before they can escalate.
Right. So they're getting ahead of the problem.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. And then I imagine, compliance is playing a big role here.
Yeah, regulatory and compliance requirements are definitely a big driver.
Okay.
And regulations like GDPR, IPA, and DORA
Right.
are really pushing organizations to use managed security service.
Right. Because that's a lot to keep track of
It is, yeah.
for any business, really.
And so these regulations are really helping to drive the adoption of MDR and MSSP services.
Okay. Are there any trends in how these services are actually being offered to customers?
Yeah, so we're seeing a trend towards specialization.
Okay.
And so providers are increasingly tailoring their services to specific industries.
Okay.
So like healthcare, finance, retail.
Okay.
And they're really focusing on the unique threats that those sectors face.
Right. Okay.
And so this is allowing them to provide more targeted and effective security solutions.
Okay. So like niche expertise.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And then there's also a push for cost efficiency,
Okay.
particularly for small and medium-sized businesses.
Right.
And so providers are offering more affordable solutions.
Okay.
And this is making MDR and MSSP services more accessible to a wider range of organizations.
Right. Okay.
And then we're also seeing some interesting regional trends.
Okay.
So North America is currently the largest market
Okay.
for MDR and MSSP services. But the Asia-Pacific region is showing strong growth potential.
Okay. So we might see some shifting there.
Yeah, it's definitely a market to watch.
Okay.
And then finally, the rise of remote work has had a big impact
Right.
on the MDR and MSSP market.
Okay.
It's increased the demand for cloud security expertise.
Right.
And it's also led to a greater focus on endpoint security.
Right. Because the endpoints are everywhere now.
Exactly, yeah. They're not all in the office anymore.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
It sounds like the market is really adapting and changing quickly to address, a variety of needs and challenges.
It's a really exciting time to be in this space.
Okay, so now for someone listening who might be, trying to figure out which of these solutions is right for them, what advice can we offer on choosing the right solution?
So this is the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And the answer really depends on the specific situation of each organization.
Right.
But there are some key questions that a listener should consider.
Okay, well, let's go through them. What
Yeah.
are the questions?
So the first question is, what are your organization's specific security needs?
Right, okay.
So what are you most worried about protecting?
Yeah, that.
Where are your biggest weaknesses?
Right. What are the gaps?
Yeah, knowing your own weaknesses is really the first step.
Yeah, okay. What else should they consider?
Budget is a big factor.
Right.
How much can you realistically invest in outsourced security services?
Okay.
Also, what is your organization's risk tolerance?
Oh.
Are you in an industry that faces particularly high levels of cyber threats?
Right.
And finally, what cybersecurity skills do you already have in-house?
Right.
Do you have an experienced security team?
Okay.
Or are you just starting out?
Okay.
So those are all important factors to consider.
Right. So really kind of a self-assessment.
Yeah, take a good hard look at your own situation.
Okay. And then based on those answers, what kind of general guidance can we give?
So generally speaking, organizations that need a very focused, proactive approach to threat detection and response might lean towards an MDR solution.
Okay.
So if you're in an industry that faces a lot of threats,
Okay.
If you have limited in-house security expertise,
Okay.
if you need that rapid response capability,
Okay.
then MDR might be a good fit.
Okay.
If your main concern is broader security management,
Okay.
continuous monitoring,
Okay.
and compliance,
Right.
then an MSSP might be a better fit.
Okay. But it doesn't have to be an either-or situation, does it?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Um, Many organizations are choosing hybrid or combined solutions
Okay.
that bring together the proactive threat detection of MDR
Okay.
with the broader security management of an MSSP.
Okay. So you can kind of get the best of both worlds.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, great.
And so that allows them to take advantage of the strengths of both approaches.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. All right, we've covered a lot today.
It's been a long deep dive.
It has been a deep dive, so let's try to sum up the main points for our listeners. What are the key takeaways from our deep dive into MDR and MSSP?
All right, so the main takeaway is that both MDR and MSSP provide valuable outsourced cybersecurity services,
Okay.
but they have different goals and strengths.
Right.
MDR is really focused on that proactive threat detection, investigation, and response.
Okay.
And they often use those advanced technologies like XDR, AI, and machine learning.
Right.
Whereas MSSP offers that broader set of security management and monitoring services with more of an emphasis on compliance and the operational side of security.
Okay, so MDR is your, dedicated threat hunter and incident responder, while MSSP is more your, broader security operations manager.
That's a perfect way to put it, yeah?
Okay, great. And we've seen that the market is, very active.
It's booming.